Hey guys, I just came here to warn you that this countdown contains some really dark stuff. I'll be talking about movies that contain disturbing imagery, graphic imagery, and dark subject matter. If you feel like you can't handle that stuff, you might want to exit out of this video. If you're still staying here, I trust that you guys know your limits. Alright, enjoy the video. Hey guys, Joel here, and it's Halloween again! The time for candy, costumes, and everything that goes bump in the night. And last year, I did a list of my top 10 favorite movies to watch on Halloween. But I'm not done talking about spooky stuff just yet. Because today, we're talking about horror movies. Horror is tied with action, comedy, animation, and musicals as my favorite movie genre. I don't know, there's just something about them that just interests me. So, how about we celebrate my favorites of the genre? This was originally going to be a top 10, but I had a hard time narrowing my choices down to 10, so I decided to make this a top 20. But even still, you'd be surprised how many movies got cut from this list. Now, before we begin, there are a few things I need to establish first. First off, there will be some spoilers since I am going to be talking a lot about these movies, so here's your spoiler warning. Second, I wasn't kidding when I said that there's going to be a lot of dark and disturbing imagery in this video, so please watch at your own risk. And finally, I decided to put a rule of one movie per franchise, just so that way we can have a little bit of variety in this list. With those said, hold on to your favorite plushie because things are about to get spooky. These are my top 20 favorite horror movies. Number 20, A Nightmare on Elm Street 3, Dream Warriors. Freddy Krueger is easily my favorite horror movie villain of all time. In fact, he's tied with Thanos and Bowser as my favorite villain in fictional history. So, naturally, I had to pick a Nightmare on Elm Street movie to be on this list. So, I'm going with Dream Warriors, not only the best in the franchise, but also the most popular one. And it's easy to see why, thanks to Freddy Krueger being at his absolute best here. He's both scary and funny, and also spouting out some of his most iconic one-liners.
Stop the prime time, bitch!
That particular one was improvised by Robert Englund, and he still says that at conventions.
Welcome to prime time, bitch!
This movie also has some of the most memorable kills of the whole franchise, with Philip's death being my favorite kill in horror movie history. And the cast does an amazing job in this movie, with Heather Langenkamp returning as Nancy as the big highlight of the movie. A short segment to start off the list, but hey, we got 19 other movies to talk about, so cut me some slack. Number 19, Trick or Treat. The horror anthology subgenre doesn't get much attention from many horror fans. Sure, we have stuff like Tales from the Crypt, Tales from the Hood, the VHS films, and Creepshow, but that's pretty much it. Hold on, I'm forgetting one. There's one anthology movie that is big among horror fans. What was it again? Ah, there we go. Released in 2007, Trick or Treat was directed by Mike Dougherty, who also gave us Krampus and Godzilla King of the Monsters. This movie takes place in the fictional town of Warren Valley, Ohio, and has different storylines going on, with each of them connecting thanks to most of the characters appearing in more than one story. And one of those characters just so happens to be this little guy named Sam. This little cutie is a demonic trick-or-treater who appears in each story to enforce the rules of Halloween. And it's because of that and his iconic appearance that causes him to join Michael Myers and Jack Skellington as a spokesperson for Halloween. Plus, despite not doing so hot at the box office due to limited theater screenings, after its release, Trick or Treat has gained a cult following. In fact, recently it's been getting a resurgence, being featured in many top 10 Halloween movies of all time and top 10 horror movies of all time. So, nice work, Mike Dougherty. Number 18, Killer Clowns from Outer Space. Speaking of movies that gained a cult following, we have this bizarre trip of a movie. This movie was directed by the Chiodo Brothers, a special effects team that has worked on a bunch of movies. One of their most iconic works was in Pee-wee's Big Adventure, where they did the makeup effects for the Large Marge scene.
And when they finally pulled the driver's body from the twisted, burning wreck, it looked like this.
The story is pretty much what the title says. Killer clowns that are from outer space cause mayhem in a small town. And boy, do they go nuts with that idea. You have people getting killed by pies.
What are you going to do with those pies, boys?
A bunch of people get killed by shadow puppets. Dozens of people in this movie get turned into cotton candy cocoons. Their UFO is a literal circus tent. And so many other scenes full of chaotic hijinks that you can't help but love.
What are you going to do? Knock my block off?
I'm serious, you need to see this movie for yourself. Number 17, Evil Dead 2013. It's crazy to think that the entire Evil Dead series has been consistently good for 43 years. So it's unbelievably hard to pick a favorite, but I'm going with Evil Dead 2013 because it's a special kind of Evil Dead movie. Mainly because, one, Ash Williams, the protagonist of the first three films, is nowhere to be seen in this movie. And that also means that the slapstick style of humor that was in the previous Evil Dead films is also missing. Which leads me to reason number 2 why this film is unique from the other Evil Dead films. It is the darkest Evil Dead film ever. I'm not even joking. This takes the cake for the most brutal film in the series by a landslide. It's just a non-stop barrage of scenes full of brutal tension and over-the-top gore. Director Fede Alvarez wasn't holding back any punches with this film, and it clearly shows. And I respect that. This is one Evil Dead film that is totally worthy of being called
Groovy.
Number 16, Sinister. Normally, horror movies don't really scare me that much. Sure, you have some stuff that will make me feel uncomfortable, like the dinner scene in the original Texas Chainsaw Massacre, but they never outright scared me. That is until I saw Sinister, which takes the cake for the scariest movie I have ever seen. This movie is about a writer named Ellison who tries to write a book about the death of a family while also trying to solve the mystery of what happened to the daughter of said family. That is until he finds a box of snuff films in the attic of the house he's living in. What follows is a collection of disturbing visuals and well-crafted jump scares that still get me today. I'm not joking, this movie legit made me jump a couple of times. Especially that lawnmower scene. If you don't like jump scares, look away right now.
Joel? Joel? You there? Huh. I guess it's our cue to go to the next segment.
Okay, I think I'm good. Anyways, number 15, Renfield. One of my favorite subgenres in horror has to be vampire films. Not the kind of vampire films that were riding off of the hype of Twilight. Get that stuff out of here. Sorry, that is in no way disrespect to any Twilight fans. I happen to have a couple of friends who are. It's just that I prefer my vampire films to be less romantic and more horror. And I think that Renfield is one of the most entertaining vampire films we've had in modern years. The story takes place 92 years after the original Dracula film in 1931. Dracula's servant, Renfield, is trying to get a normal life again. He does so by helping out society and getting himself out of the abusive relationship between him and Dracula. First off, I wasn't kidding when I said this is one of the most entertaining vampire films we've had in modern years, because this movie is hilarious. There were multiple points in this movie that made me laugh hard. And nowhere is that more apparent than in the unhinged performance by Nicolas Cage as Dracula. I mean, Nicolas Cage is already an entertaining actor.
Oh, no, not the beast! Not the beast! Ah! Oh, my eyes! My eyes! Ah!
But in this film, it's almost like the director just pointed the camera at him and only told him go. And then there are the amazing action scenes with some really extreme gore. I'm serious, there are some kills in this movie that would make even a Mortal Kombat character blush. Overall, an entertaining vampire film that is definitely worthy of sinking your fangs into. Number 14, Gremlins.
And it certainly is not a horror film.
Yeah, sorry Spielberg, but it looks like you're in the minority with that opinion. Yeah, compared to everything else on this list, Gremlins is more on the tamer side of horror movies. Granted, it could be because Gremlins was rated PG at the time, but this was released in 1984, a time when PG-13 wasn't even a thing. But hey, that just means it joins alongside Coraline and Hocus Pocus in terms of a gateway drug to the world of horror. The amount of chaos the Gremlins cause in Kingston Falls never ceases to bore me, especially the bar scene. But even with that chaos, there's still a good amount of heart going around this movie thanks to the relationship between Billy and Gizmo, aka one of the cutest things in movie history. Add in the amazing animatronic work behind Gizmo and the Gremlins themselves, the crazy score by Jerry Goldsmith, and the amazing performances from everyone in the cast, and you got yourself one good time. It's a fun horror movie for the entire family. Number 13, The Black Phone. Finally, I get to talk about Blumhouse on this list. If you want to know which production company is responsible for the resurgence in horror recently, then all fingers are pointed at Blumhouse. They have been behind some of the biggest horror films in recent years, with The Black Phone arguably being the most popular answer for the best Blumhouse movie. Based on the book of the same name, The Black Phone was directed by Scott Derrickson, who not only made Sinister, which was already on this list, and is also a Blumhouse film, but he also made the first Doctor Strange movie. Talk about range! The movie follows a young boy named Finney as he tries to escape the basement of a serial killer named the Grabber, all while getting phone calls from the Grabber's previous victims through the titular Black Phone. Right out of the gate, you could tell how stylish the movie is just by looking at it. Since the story takes place in the 70s, Scott Derrickson wanted the movie to look like the 70s, which I think he succeeded at. And there are a lot of memorable scenes in which Finney tries to look around him to find ways to escape the basement. And speaking of Finney, Mason Thames really succeeds at portraying the emotions he's going through. And it's shocking to think that this is his first ever major acting role. And then you have Ethan Hawke's fantastic performance as the Grabber, who has quickly become one of my favorite horror movie villains. I could keep going on and on about this movie, but we have a countdown to finish, so you really need to check it out for yourself. I'm sure you'll enjoy it. Number 12, Saw X. Do I even need to explain what Saw is? I mean, it's freaking Saw. It helped create the torture movie boom in the late 2000s and is one of the biggest horror movie franchises of all time. But the quality of the movies? Well, that ends up being divided by the fans, with the Chris Rock-led Spiral being the biggest outlier when it comes to that and is widely regarded as one of the worst Saw films. So when Saw X was in development, director Kevin Groeder decided to have it be a return to form for the franchise and have it take place between Saw 1 and Saw 2. In this movie, John Kramer, aka Jigsaw, goes to Mexico for a last-minute cancer treatment from a controversial doctor named Cecilia Peterson. But when he finds out that the entire operation turned out to be an elaborate scam, he decides to take revenge on the people who were in on the scam. And for the first time in the series, you actually feel like rooting for John Kramer as he tests these awful people. And that's thanks to Tobin Bell's phenomenal performance in this movie. I mean, in the past Saw films, we only knew him as a self-righteous man who doesn't consider himself a murderer.
Killing is distasteful.
I'm sorry, I'm allergic to bullshit.
But here, Bell explores his inner emotions and humanizes him more than any other Saw movie. And the scenes where I think he succeeds at that is the scenes where John Kramer is with his apprentice, Amanda. Tobin Bell and Shawnee Smith have been with the franchise ever since the first Saw film, so finally seeing them in a scene together is so rewarding and just lets us enjoy the chemistry between them. And the fact that Tobin Bell was 80 years old when he was filming this makes his performance even more impressive. Then, like any Saw movies, there are the traps, and these are some of the franchise's best. I think it's safe to say that Saw X revitalized the franchise. It gave fans what they wanted and got them excited for what's to come. So, it looks like the future of Saw is looking brighter than ever. Number 11. It. It's crazy to think that I have gone 9 segments without mentioning Stephen King. Well, I kinda have a reason for that because, well, I haven't seen that many Stephen King movies. But out of the ones that I have seen, I think It 2017, or It Chapter 1, is my favorite Stephen King movie. Sure, there are some people who prefer the 1990 miniseries with Tim Curry as Pennywise, but what this movie does is way different from the miniseries. Instead of scenes where Pennywise is clowning around, pun intended, this movie's Pennywise is going for the full creep factor. Some examples are Pennywise chasing Ben through a dark hallway in a library, creeping out Mike with a burning door, and especially the projector jump scare. Bill Skarsgård's performance really makes this Pennywise memorable and almost as good as Tim Curry's portrayal of the dancing clown. But let's be frank, nobody will ever be as good as Tim Curry. That guy's a legend.
Do you have Prince Albert in a can? You do? Well, you better let the poor guy out.
And while I'm on the topic of performances, the kids were freaking phenomenal in this movie. Especially Jaden Martell as Bill. You could feel the absolute despair he's feeling after losing his brother Georgie. And the final act where the kids confront Pennywise is both fantastic and epic. With all of those factors combined, it's no wonder that It 2017 was both a box office and critical success. Number 10, The Silence of the Lambs. Oh boy, I knew I had to deal with this eventually. Now before y'all start those comments saying, actually, The Silence of the Lambs is not a horror movie, it's a crime thriller. I'm going to let YouTuber Cody Leach describe my opinions here because I totally agree with him.
Here, my definition of horror versus thriller. Horror is meant to horrify you. Thrillers are meant to thrill you.
So, in that sense, I wouldn't call Silence of the Lambs a thriller because of the horrific subject matter that is going on in the movie. Heck, you can even make the same case for 7, but I haven't seen 7 yet, so I'm not going to talk about it here. I don't think I need to go over the story that much because I'm pretty sure everyone knows how this movie goes. But for those who need a refresher, this film is about FBI trainee Clarice Starling, who is hunting down a serial killer named Buffalo Bill, and she seeks the advice from Hannibal Lecter in order to capture him. Now, like I said, this movie contains a lot of horrific subject matter, mainly with how Buffalo Bill kills his victims. I mean, his whole gimmick is that he skins his female victims in specific ways. Not to mention a lot of Hannibal Lecter's scenes. The way he gets into people's minds is so fascinating that it's one of the reasons why this is a psychological horror film. But if you want true horror, then look no further than Lecter's escape from the art gallery. It's a brutal scene. Speaking of Hannibal Lecter, Anthony Hopkins' performance here is perfect. Every scene he's in, he just steals the show.
A census taker once tried to test me. I ate his liver with some fava beans and a nice Chianti.
It's no wonder he would reprise the role in both Hannibal and Red Dragon. And while I'm on the topic of performances, Jodie Foster is fantastic as Clarice Starling. She makes the character easily likable. It's no wonder that Foster and Hopkins both won Oscars for their performances in this movie. Speaking of awards, Silence of the Lambs is the first and only horror movie to win Best Picture at the Oscars. I guess that speaks to how iconic this movie is. Number 9, Nope. It's about time we get to a Jordan Peele film on this list. Considering that he has become the master of modern day horror despite only have made 3 films, and that he won an Oscar for one of those films for Best Screenplay, there was no doubt that Jordan Peele would show up on here. But the question is, which one is it? Well, let's do some process of elimination. Get Out was a really strong start to his career and almost made it on this list, but it didn't quite make it. And Us was a really good horror comedy, but it had a couple things lacking in it. But it could have made it on the list, but not really high up. So that just leaves us with his recent film, Nope. And I'm going to be honest, this wasn't even a competition between the three because this has always been my favorite Jordan Peele film. This movie is about a pair of horse wranglers dealing with a UFO in their town, which leads them to try to get a money shot of the UFO in order to get famous. Now, as you can tell from that description, this movie is about what people will do in order to get famous, and that's kind of the thing with Mr. Peele. He often puts layers of commentary in his films, and Nope has a lot of them. It deals with the nature of animals, how people deal with trauma, Hollywood exploitation, animal exploitation, and so much more to appreciate in the story. And Nope is up there with Jaws in terms of horror movie blockbusters. Jordan Peele intentionally wrote this script as a way to bring people back to the theaters since he wrote it during the COVID-19 lockdown. And it definitely shows thanks to the movie's grand sense of scale. There's just a lot to love in this movie. The characters are great, the score is great, and the cinematography is breathtaking. I can't wait to see what Jordan Peele has in store for us in the future. Number 8, Late Night with the Devil. Okay, real talk, I don't know what to say about this because this was a last minute inclusion. Before I got to watch this movie, the script was done. Like, done. But when I saw it, I knew I had to talk about it here. So you can imagine my frustration when I had to remove one of the movies that I was going to talk about on this list to make way for this one. Well, guess I better start writing. This movie focuses on a late-night host named Jack Delroy as he hosts a Halloween episode of his show when things start to go awry once he comes in contact with supernatural spirits and the literal devil. Well, not literally the devil, just a girl who got possessed by the devil, but you know what I mean. And in my opinion, this might be one of the most coziest horror movies that I could ever find in this day and age. Mostly due to how well it handles both the 70s vibe and the late-night talk show vibes. As someone who loves watching clips of Jimmy Fallon, I cannot believe how well they nailed the late night show atmosphere, and David Dastmalchian gives a flawless performance as Jack Delroy. And when the movie gets tense, it really gets tense, but since this is a fairly recent movie, I won't delve into too much. I'm just glad that I got to talk about this movie right in the nick of time, because this movie really deserves it. Number 7, Megan. Man, Blumhouse really knew how to start 2023 off. Sure, there were some other horror movies in 2023, but when the trailer for this movie dropped in 2022, we all knew that it was going to be a huge success. I mean, the film got super popular before it was even released. That's gotta mean something. And I think all that popularity falls right back to Megan herself. Her iconic look, her voice courtesy of Jenna Davis, and her physical performance done by Amy Donald made her an instant icon and joined the ranks of Michael Myers, Jason Voorhees, and even Freddy Krueger in terms of horror icons. Outside of her, you get some memorable characters accompanied by amazing performances from the cast, as well as some emotional scenes. I legit teared up during the third act, but it balances those emotions with some well-done humor. I'm so glad this movie did so well because we're getting a sequel next year!
It's insane, right?
Number 6, Bride of Chucky. That's right, Megan's not the only killer doll out there. There's another one that's just as iconic as her.
Hey kid, I'm gonna go kill your sister. You wanna come?
That's right, it's Chucky time! I mean, he's right next to Freddy Krueger as my favorite horror movie villain. Heck, I even got a plushie of the little guy. So naturally, a Chucky movie had to be on here, and I'm going with Bride of Chucky because it's the most fun Chucky movie. This was the point in the series where the comedy really started to take over because this movie was freaking hilarious. There are funny banters between Chucky and Tiffany.
What would Martha Stewart say?
Fuck Martha Stewart! Martha Stewart can kiss my shiny plastic butt!
And even Chucky's one-liners get a boost in humor.
It ain't the size that counts, asshole. It's what you do with it.
And the practical effects with the dolls themselves look wonderful. Chucky's stitched-up design is probably his most iconic look in the series. I don't know what else to say. This movie rules. Alright, Confession time. I originally was going to have Cabin in the Woods at this spot, but it has now been overthrown. Instead, we have number 5, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. In all honesty, while I really respect the original Halloween, it's not really one of my favorites. Woohoo, I feel like I'm going to tick off a bunch of Michael Myers fans, but I am not afraid of any of those comments, so come at me! So I'm going to be the weird guy and go with the black sheep of the franchise, Halloween 3, Season of the Witch. The reason why I say it's the black sheep of the franchise is because, well, Michael Myers is nowhere to be seen in this movie. For those unaware, John Carpenter originally wanted the Halloween franchise to be more of an anthology series in the same vein of The Twilight Zone. But people were more interested in Michael Myers, so when he didn't show up in the third film, they were not interested. And so, Season of the Witch was both a box office bomb and got negative reviews, which led John Carpenter and Deborah Hill to scrap the anthology idea. But thankfully, reevaluation in later years has given this film its own reputation as a standalone cult film. And I'm glad it's gained the recognition it deserves, because honestly, this movie is wonderful. It's got a great Halloween atmosphere, as well as some awesome witchcraft and sci-fi elements to it. It also has one of my favorite scores from John Carpenter. Sure, it's not as iconic as the original Halloween score, but it's just as good as the original. And the movie is not afraid to show its weird and dark side. I mean, a kid gets killed in this movie. Yeah, a freaking kid. But the weirdness of this movie is what makes it so charming, and it has amazing characters with amazing performances to back it up. Sure, a couple of diehard Michael Myers fans will call me crazy, but hey, it's just my opinion. Number 4, The Lost Boys. It's been a while since we had a vampire film on this list. Well, let's fix that. Released in 1987, The Lost Boys was directed by the late Joel Schumacher, who also gave us the 2004 Phantom of the Opera. Get out! Nobody talks about you, get out! This movie's about a boy named Michael who gets involved in a biker gang that ends up being a gang full of vampires. So it's up to his little brother Sam and the Frog Brothers to save him from the undead. Now, when I look around online, people say that The Lost Boys is one of, if not the best, vampire movies. And I 100% agree. Just about everything in this movie freaking rules. The cinematography, the soundtrack, the story, the characters, and the final act where the characters fight off the vampires. Plus, Kiefer Sutherland's performance as David is the main highlight of the film. It's thanks to The Lost Boys that I'm a big fan of vampires. Number 3, Scream. Of course Scream was going to be on this list. Why wouldn't it be? I said this before in my top 10 Halloween movies list, but it needs to be said again. Scream brought the genre back to life in the late 90s. I mean, think about it. Before Scream, the horror genre was beginning to dry up, but it was thanks to Kevin Williamson's clever script that it was brought back to life. It knew it was a horror movie and acknowledged the tropes of the genre in a very, very funny way.
See, the police are always off track with this shit. If they'd watch Prom Night, they'd save time. There's a formula to it. A very simple formula. Everybody's a suspect.
And to be honest, I don't really know what else to say because everyone has praised Scream. And I do mean everyone. I mean, come on. It's a classic for a reason. Number 2, Talk to Me. This movie was a genuine surprise. Not only was it announced out of nowhere, but it was also surprisingly made by a pair of first-time directors. Danny and Michael Filippo, the guys behind the YouTube channel Racka Racka. So when they decided to direct a horror movie, they decided to go with a unique take on demonic possession. This movie's about a girl named Mia who's still dealing with the loss of her mother. But when she finds out that there's a hand that allows a spirit to possess whoever's holding the hand, she inadvertently makes things worse when the spirit of her mother possesses her best friend's brother. And that's what makes Talk to Me very different from films like, I don't know, The Exorcist. It uses possession as a metaphor for getting high. And that is perfect considering that this is a movie where teenagers are the main characters. And while this movie is not sinister levels of scary, it is definitely unsettling. It also has phenomenal performances by the cast, really good use of foreshadowing, really good use of sound, and a jaw-dropping finale. And that's all I'm gonna say without spoiling the film, because it is worth seeing for yourself. And now, on to number 1. Number 1, Shaun of the Dead. To be honest, this wasn't even a contest. This was always going to be number 1. No other horror movie has given me this much joy than the first film from Edgar Wright, the same guy who gave us Scott Pilgrim vs. the World. Along with Silence of the Lambs, this is the only horror movie that I have ever rewatched. And that's thanks to this movie being a laugh riot from start to finish. Whether it's a simple fart joke from Ed,
Oh. Oh my god, that's rotten! I'll stop doing them when you start laughing. I am not laughing, keep going.
the record throwing scene,
Purple Rain. Sign of the Times. Definitely not. The Batman soundtrack. Throw it.
or the scene where all the main characters beat up a zombie to the tune of Queen's Don't Stop Me Now. There is a lot of scene for everyone to laugh their butts off. And that is why Shaun of the Dead is my number 1 favorite horror movie. Whew, thanks for watching, guys. This was a lot of work. If you enjoyed this video, please like, comment, and subscribe, and even share this video around. Take care, you guys, and have a happy Halloween.